My boyfriend told me to leave my own condo so his ex could come over. He had no idea he was about to lose everything. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 32 years old, and until one Wednesday evening, I believed that once two people built a life together, respect came naturally. Looking back, our relationship didn't end because of one argument. It ended because one sentence exposed everything I'd refused to see. Ethan Brooks and I had been together for 4 years, and we'd lived in my condo for the last two. I bought it years before we met after spending most of my 20s saving for it, so it was more than a home. It was proof that I could build something entirely on my own. When Ethan moved in, our arrangement was simple. He helped with groceries and utilities while I covered the mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and every major expense. It never bothered me because I believed we were building a future together, not keeping score. To everyone else, we looked like the couple who'd eventually get married. We rarely argued, our friends spent most weekends at our place, and every summer we hosted a barbecue that had quietly become our tradition. I handled the food and outdoor setup while Ethan organized the guest list, decorations, and somehow convinced everyone to bring enough desserts to feed a neighborhood. 3 days before this year's barbecue, nearly 50 people had already RSVP'd. That Wednesday evening, I was comparing liquor store prices at the kitchen island when Ethan wandered in, glanced at his phone, and said as casually as if he were reminding me to buy milk, "Oh, I invited Chloe." My pen stopped. "Is Chloe?" "My ex." The room suddenly felt much quieter. "You mean the woman you dated for 5 years? The one you always said manipulated you?" He shrugged. "She's different now." I waited for him to smile. He didn't. "What do you mean?" "She reached out a few weeks ago. We ran into each other last week, talked for a while, and honestly, she's grown up." My stomach tightened. "So you've been talking to your ex, invited her to our barbecue in my condo, and you're only telling me now? I didn't think you'd make such a big deal out of it." I closed my notebook and looked him in the eye. "For 4 years, you've told me she lied to you, manipulated you, and was the biggest mistake of your life. You said blocking her was one of the healthiest decisions you'd ever made. Now you've invited her into my home without even asking me." He folded his arms. "People change." "Maybe," I said, "but that doesn't explain why you made the decision first and told me afterward." He rolled his eyes. "You're turning this into something it isn't." His words didn't make me angry. They disappointed me. I took a slow breath before answering. "So let me see if I've got this straight. You reconnected with your ex without telling me, invited her to the biggest event we host every year, and expected me to smile and pretend none of that deserved a conversation? They're just friends now." I couldn't stop the bitter smile that crossed my face. I've heard that sentence before. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since he'd walked into the kitchen, I saw genuine irritation replace his casual confidence. "You don't trust me," he said, his voice hardening. I held his gaze. "I trusted the version of you who would have talked to me before inviting your ex into our home. That's the version I'm struggling to find right now." For the first time that evening, genuine irritation crossed his face. "Natalie, seriously," he said, rubbing his forehead. "It's one guest." I shook my head. "No, Ethan, it isn't just one guest. It's your ex-girlfriend, and pretending those are the same thing doesn't make it true." He let out a long, impatient sigh. "God, you're acting so insecure." "I don't think asking for basic respect is insecurity," I replied evenly. "Being uncomfortable with this situation isn't the same as being jealous." He gave a dismissive shrug. "That's exactly what jealousy looks like." "No," I said quietly. "Jealousy is fearing someone will replace you. This is different. I'm telling you that something you've already done hurt me, and instead of listening, you're trying to convince me my feelings aren't valid." For a moment, he simply stared at me before shaking his head. "I already invited Chloe. I'm not taking it back." "Then uninvite her." "I'm not embarrassing her because you're being paranoid." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you'd rather embarrass me?" His expression hardened. "Nobody's embarrassing you." I let out a slow breath, trying one last time to make him understand. "Ethan, I'm standing right in front of you telling you this hurts me. Instead of hearing that, you're more concerned about disappointing your ex. Do you honestly not see how that feels?" Rather than answering, he picked up his phone and turned toward the hallway. "I'm done talking about this." "So am I." He took several steps away before stopping at the end of the hallway. Without even turning fully toward me, he spoke the sentence that ended our relationship. "If you're going to be uncomfortable all night, then just leave. Go see a movie, meet a friend, book a hotel if you want. It's only a few hours, and I'm not going to let your jealousy ruin everyone's night." For a moment, I honestly wondered if I'd misunderstood him. He wasn't asking me to compromise. He was asking me to leave my own home so he could entertain his ex-girlfriend. I stood there without saying a word, studying his face as though I were seeing him for the first time. There was no guilt, no hesitation, and certainly no apology. The only emotion I recognized was annoyance, as if I had become an inconvenience standing between him and the evening he'd already planned. Then, almost all at once, dozens of moments from the past several months suddenly made sense. The nights he'd become strangely protective of his phone, the unexplained late evenings at work, the extra attention he'd started paying to his appearance before supposedly meeting coworkers, even the way he'd grown oddly defensive whenever Chloe's name came up in old conversations. None of those moments had seemed important on their own, but together they formed a picture I could no longer ignore. I quietly set my pen on the counter. "Understood." The tension immediately disappeared from his face. "See?" he said with a relieved smile. "I knew you'd calm down." Without waiting for another response, he wished me good night and disappeared into the bedroom. A few moments later, I heard the door click shut. I didn't move until the condo was completely quiet. Only then did I open my laptop. The guest list was already on the screen because every invitation had been sent from my email account. I created a new message and rested my hands on the keyboard for nearly a minute, carefully choosing my words. When I finally started typing, I made sure every sentence could be defended because every sentence was true. Subject: Summer barbecue canceled. Hi everyone. I'm truly sorry for the last-minute notice, but Saturday's barbecue has been canceled. Earlier tonight, Ethan told me he had invited his ex-girlfriend, Chloe, to our home without discussing it with me first. When I explained that I wasn't comfortable hosting his ex in my own house, he suggested that if I didn't like it, I should simply leave my own home for the evening so she could attend. I'm not willing to host a gathering under those circumstances, and I'm certainly not leaving my own home. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, and I hope we can all get together another time under much better circumstances. Natalie. I read the email twice, searching for anything that might be unfair or exaggerated. There wasn't a single sentence I needed to change. I clicked send. Within seconds, 50 emails were on their way. I packed a small overnight bag, carried it into the guest suite, locked the door behind me, and set my alarm for 6 the next morning. At the time, I thought I'd simply canceled a barbecue. I had no idea I'd just set in motion the event that would unravel Ethan's entire double life. The next morning, Ethan didn't wake me. His phone did. Even through the wall, I could hear it vibrating almost non-stop on the nightstand. One call ended, another immediately replaced it, and before the room fell quiet again, the phone had already started buzzing for a third time. Judging by the relentless stream of notifications, the email had reached exactly the people it was supposed to. Another call came in before the previous one had even ended, followed almost immediately by another. I couldn't help smiling into my coffee mug. The email had landed exactly where I'd intended, and judging by the relentless stream of calls, people were reading every word. About 15 minutes later, someone tried the guest suite door. The handle rattled once, then again with much more force. "Natalie?" I didn't answer. "Natalie, unlock the door." Instead, I took another sip of coffee. One of the reasons I'd fallen in love with this condo was the guest suite's tiny kitchenette. That morning, it felt less like a guest room and more like the safest place in the building. The knocking quickly turned into pounding. "Natalie, what the hell did you do? My phone won't stop ringing." I remained exactly where I was. After another minute, the pounding stopped. I heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway, followed by the bedroom door slamming shut. The silence lasted only a few seconds before another phone call came through, then hurried footsteps raced back toward the guest suite. He hit the door again. "Natalie, I know you sent something. What did you send?" This time, something in Ethan's voice had changed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was scared. That told me everything. If my email had been unfair, he'd be furious. Instead, he was terrified that people believed every word of it. I let him stew for nearly an hour before unlocking the guest suite. The moment he saw me, he exploded. "What the hell is wrong with you? My mom called. Claire called. Maya thinks I'm cheating. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You need to fix this." His phone kept buzzing in his hand. "Send another email," he demanded. "Tell everyone you misunderstood, that you overreacted, that you were jealous. Just apologize." I met his eyes. "I'm not sending another email." He stared at me. "You can't be serious." "I am." "You lied." "No, I told people exactly what happened." "You twisted everything." I folded my arms. "Did you tell me to leave my own home?" His mouth opened, then closed. "That's not what I meant." "Then tell me what you did mean." He couldn't. "You were supposed to trust me," he said instead. "I did," I replied quietly, "until you gave me a reason not to." His frustration turned into accusation. "This is emotional abuse." I let out a humorless laugh. "You secretly reconnected with your ex, invited her into my home without asking me, told me to leave if I wasn't comfortable, and somehow I'm the abusive one? You're manipulating everyone." I told everyone the truth. "They don't know the full story." "What story?" I asked. "That Chloe is just a friend? If that's true, why hide the fact that you'd reconnected with her?" He had no answer. Instead, he muttered, "You made me look like the bad guy." I shook my head. "No, Ethan, you managed that all by yourself." Before either of us could say anything else, the front door unlocked. Claire hurried inside and wrapped Ethan in a hug before she even looked at me. "I came as soon as I got your message." Then she turned, glaring. "What is wrong with you?" "I was about to ask you the same thing," I replied evenly. "I read your email. Did you really send that to 50 people?" "I did." She looked horrified. "You completely humiliated him." What struck me wasn't what she said. It was what she never asked. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask to hear my side. She'd already decided I was the problem. So I asked one simple question. "Did Ethan tell you what he said before I sent that email?" "He said you overreacted because Chloe was invited." "And did he mention that he told me to leave my own condo so his ex could come instead?" Claire hesitated. For one evening." I nodded. "So he did tell you." "He didn't mean it like that." "Then explain what he meant, because I'm still waiting." He was trying to calm things down. "By asking me to leave my own home?" She sighed impatiently. "You're twisting his words." Ethan jumped in. "I was trying to compromise." I looked at both of them in disbelief. "A compromise? Your version of compromise was that I leave, you stay, your ex comes over, and everyone pretends that's perfectly normal." Neither of them had an answer. Claire finally broke the silence. I can't believe you're throwing away a 4-year relationship over one misunderstanding. I looked her straight in the eye. No, I'm ending it because I finally understand the relationship I was actually in. The room fell silent. After a long pause, Ethan let out a bitter laugh. So that's it? You're kicking me out? I haven't even said that. You've been acting like a dictator. I canceled the barbecue. You publicly humiliated me. I told the truth. His jaw tightened. You've caused me emotional distress. After everything you've done, I shouldn't have to pay utilities or groceries this month. For a second, I genuinely wondered if I'd heard him correctly. Yesterday, we were arguing about trust. Now he expected me to financially support him after telling me to leave my own home for his ex. Then I looked at Claire. Instead of correcting him, she nodded in agreement. Honestly, that's the least you could do. For a moment, I simply stared at both of them. Less than 24 hours earlier, we'd been arguing about respect. Somehow the conversation had evolved into them explaining why I should financially support the man who'd told me to leave my own home for his ex-girlfriend. And strangely enough, that was the exact moment I stopped feeling hurt. Everything became perfectly clear. The relationship I'd spent weeks trying to save was already over. What remained wasn't a breakup. It was a legal process. I nodded. You're right. Both Ethan and Claire looked surprised. Claire even smiled, convinced I'd finally come to my senses. I'm glad you're being reasonable. I am, I said. This stopped being a relationship the moment Ethan told me to leave my own home. From now on, we'll handle it legally. Without another word, I walked into my office. My laptop was already open. It took only a few minutes to download the state's official notice to vacate form, fill in the required information, print 2 copies, and sign them. When I returned, I handed 1 copy to Ethan. He frowned as he read the first page. What's this? Your 30-day notice to vacate. He looked up in disbelief. You're joking. I'm not. Claire grabbed the document from his hands. You can't do this. I can, I replied calmly. I own this condo, and Ethan is an at-will occupant. I'm ending that arrangement. His face turned pale. You're actually throwing me out? I'm ending your right to live here. And no, this isn't because of one barbecue. I met his eyes. You secretly reconnected with your ex, hid it from me for months, invited her into my home without asking, then told me to leave if I wasn't comfortable. Yesterday didn't destroy our relationship. It simply revealed what it had already become. Claire slammed the notice onto the coffee table. You'll be hearing from a lawyer. I hope so, I answered evenly. At least lawyers deal in facts. She waited for me to argue. Instead, I opened the front door. Claire, it's time for you to leave. You can't kick me out. I can. This is my property. If you stay after I've asked you to leave, you're trespassing. She glared at me before grabbing her purse. Ethan, call me. We're not letting her get away with this. The door slammed behind her. Only a minute later, Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He answered, listened for less than a minute, then slowly lowered the phone. It was Chloe. What did she want? He hesitated. She wanted to know if it was true that I asked you to leave your own home so she could come to the barbecue. And what did you tell her? He couldn't answer. For the first time since everything began, he looked genuinely ashamed. After a long silence, he finally spoke. She wanted to know what really happened. So she didn't believe your version. He rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't tell her everything. I know. I was trying to avoid drama. I shook my head. No, Ethan, you were trying to avoid consequences. He looked away. That still doesn't justify kicking me out. I disagree. You really think one bad night erases 4 years? It wasn't one night. It was 4 years of warning signs that finally became impossible to ignore. Before he could respond, his phone rang again. This time it was his mother. Hi, Mom. Even from across the room, I could hear her voice. Ethan, did you really tell Natalie to leave her own condo? It's not what I meant. I didn't ask what you meant, she replied sharply. I asked what you said. After several painful seconds, he finally admitted the truth. I told her she could leave for a few hours if she was uncomfortable. A brief silence followed before his mother answered. Then why didn't you ask Chloe not to come? Ethan searched for an explanation but couldn't find one. It wasn't that simple. It sounds very simple to me, she replied. For years, you've told this family Chloe was the worst mistake you ever made. Now you're choosing her feelings over the woman you've lived with for 2 years, and you expected Natalie to accept that? He closed his eyes. Mom, I'm disappointed in you. The call ended. He lowered the phone without another word. About 10 minutes later, my own phone rang. Normally, I ignored unknown numbers, but something told me to answer. Hello? A hesitant voice replied. Natalie? Yes. This is Chloe. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Hi. I hope this isn't inappropriate, she said. I almost didn't call. It's okay. She paused before asking the question that had clearly been weighing on her. Did Ethan really tell you to leave your own condo so I could come to the barbecue? Yes, she sighed. He told me you misunderstood him. I quoted his exact words in the email. I know, she admitted quietly. After I confronted him, he told me what he actually said. Her embarrassment was obvious. I'm sorry. I believed him when he said you'd overreacted. I had no idea he'd really asked you to leave. I appreciate you calling. There is something else you should know. A knot formed in my stomach. What is it? He told me everyone already knew we'd started talking again. He even said you'd invited me because you thought enough time had passed. For a moment I couldn't speak. Another lie. One that served no purpose except making both of us believe the other already knew the truth. He actually told you that? Yes, I never would have accepted the invitation if I'd known what was really happening. I'm sorry. I believe you. After another brief silence, she said softly, I hope everything works out. The answer slipped out before I could stop it. I don't. I let out a small sigh. I mean, I hope things work out for me. We both laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny, but because we were both too emotionally exhausted to react any other way. After we hung up, I stood alone in the kitchen, replaying every word of the conversation. Ethan hadn't been lying only to me. He'd been telling Chloe a completely different story, carefully keeping us apart so neither of us could compare what we'd been told. At that moment, everything finally became clear. He hadn't been protecting either of us. He'd been protecting himself. When I ended the call, I remained in the kitchen for several minutes, replaying every word Chloe had said. The conversation confirmed something I hadn't fully understood until then. Ethan hadn't been honest with either of us. He'd hidden his renewed relationship with Chloe from me while telling Chloe that I'd already accepted it. Instead of dealing with the consequences of his choices, he'd created two completely different versions of the same story and hoped neither of us would ever compare them. That realization hurt far more than the invitation itself. Late that afternoon, he knocked softly on the door to my office. "Natalie, can we talk?" I looked up from my laptop but didn't invite him in. "I've been thinking," he said. "I'll tell Chloe not to come." A tired smile crossed my face. "You still think this is about the barbecue?" He frowned. "Isn't it?" "No. The barbecue was just the moment everything finally came into the open. This is about trust, and trust doesn't come back simply because you undo yesterday's decision." He stepped farther into the room. "I'm willing to fix this." "How?" "I'll block Chloe again." I couldn't help letting out a quiet sigh. "You already blocked her once, Ethan, and somehow you still found your way back to her. Blocking her isn't the problem. The problem is that you made the choice to reconnect in the first place." "I'll prove you can trust me again." "You already proved who you are," I replied gently. "It just wasn't the version of you I thought I knew." He slowly lowered himself into the chair across from my desk. "I love you." There was a time when those 3 words could end almost any argument between us. This time they barely reached me. "I think you love the version of me who never questioned you," I said quietly. "The woman who trusted every explanation without asking uncomfortable questions." His shoulders slumped. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I asked. "Tell me the last time you made a decision that affected both of us and stopped to ask how I'd feel before making it." He searched for an answer, but the silence that followed told me everything. Finally, he looked down. "I made a mistake." I shook my head. "No, Ethan. You made dozens of choices, one after another. Yesterday wasn't the mistake. Yesterday was simply the first time you couldn't explain those choices away." He stood slowly, studying my face for any sign that I might change my mind. "So, this is really over?" "Yes." "There isn't anything I can say?" I met his eyes. "No." He remained there for another few seconds before quietly leaving the room. A moment later, I heard the bedroom door close, and for the first time in days, the condo fell completely silent. I honestly believed that conversation had been our final confrontation. I was wrong. The following morning, a little after 10, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, a process server in a gray suit introduced himself, handed me a thick envelope, asked for my signature, wished me a pleasant day, and disappeared down the hallway before I had a chance to ask any questions. I carried the envelope into the kitchen, where Ethan sat at the island, pretending to scroll through his phone while watching me from the corner of his eye. The moment I opened the envelope, I understood why he looked so confident. Inside was a formal demand letter from his attorney. According to the document, I had illegally attempted to evict Ethan, emotionally abused him, publicly defamed him through the barbecue email, and caused severe emotional distress that supposedly entitled him to financial compensation. The letter became even more absurd as I continued reading, eventually claiming that Ethan had acquired an ownership interest in my condo simply because we'd lived there together for 2 years. I finished reading the letter and couldn't help letting out a quiet laugh. The claims weren't just exaggerated. Some of them had no legal basis at all. I looked across the kitchen. "Ethan, did you actually read this before your lawyer sent it?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I skimmed it. My lawyer said I have rights." "I'm sure you do," I replied. "But owning half of a condo I bought years before we met isn't one of them." He pointed weakly at the paperwork. "That's what he told me." I tapped the paragraph claiming he had an ownership interest in my condo. "You never paid the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, or any major repairs. Explain to me how you think you own half of it." After a long silence, he muttered, "My lawyer said relationships aren't always that simple." "They are when it comes to property," I said. "Either your name is on the deed or it isn't." He lowered his eyes. "So what are you going to do?" "The same thing I should have done the moment this became a legal dispute. And that's, I'm hiring a better lawyer." For the first time, his confidence disappeared. He'd expected tears, arguments, and guilt. Instead, every threat he made was answered with documents, evidence, and legal procedure. That was the one thing he hadn't prepared for. Holding the envelope, another realization settled over me. Ethan wasn't trying to save our relationship anymore. He was trying to win. That hurt more than I expected. For 4 years, I trusted him with my home, my passwords, my future, and the life we'd planned together. Now he was asking an attorney to paint me as abusive simply because I refused to leave the condo I'd bought long before we met. That afternoon, I met with an attorney named Victoria Reynolds, who'd been highly recommended by a coworker. Within minutes, I understood why. She listened far more than she spoke while I handed over everything I'd collected: the cancellation email, the notice to vacate, the demand letter, screenshots, and the notes I'd written immediately after our argument. When she finished reading, she closed the folder and nodded. You've documented this better than most clients who come in months after something like this. I started the same night it happened. It shows. Keep doing exactly that. I hesitated. Am I missing anything? She smiled. No, if anything, Ethan is. She tapped the demand letter. I'm not concerned about the emotional distress claim, and the ownership argument is even weaker. What concerns me is that he's making claims that are objectively false. Judges don't usually appreciate that. She leaned forward. From now on, don't argue with him. Don't threaten him. Don't raise your voice, and don't try to convince him of anything. If he wants this handled legally, let it stay legal. Our job is to document facts and let the evidence speak. For the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't carrying everything alone. As I stood to leave, Victoria added one final recommendation. Install security cameras. In the common areas? She nodded. Exactly. The living room, kitchen, and entryway. They're just as valuable for protecting you as they are for protecting your property. People are usually much more careful once they know there's an objective record of what actually happened. The advice made perfect sense. I ordered the cameras that same afternoon. 2 days later, the cameras arrived, and I deliberately installed them while Ethan was home. I wasn't trying to provoke him. I wanted there to be no question that they were visible, legal, and permanently in place. He walked into the living room just as I was installing the second security camera near the front door. What are you doing? Installing security cameras. His expression hardened. So now you're spying on me? I tightened the mounting bracket before looking at him. No, I'm protecting myself. You can't record me. I can record the common areas of my own home. He let out a bitter laugh. This is unbelievable. I met his eyes. Your sister walked into this condo without permission. You've accused me of harassment, and your lawyer is claiming I'm trying to steal property that legally belongs to me. At this point, documenting what happens inside my own home is the responsible thing to do. He folded his arms. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, I said calmly. They'll tell you the same thing my lawyer already has. He glared at the camera for a few seconds before turning around and walking back to the bedroom. Victoria had been right. The cameras didn't solve our problems, but they changed Ethan's behavior almost immediately. The late-night television stopped. The unexplained messes in the kitchen disappeared, and even the passive-aggressive comments became rare. It wasn't because he'd suddenly become respectful. He simply knew there was now an objective record of what happened in the shared areas of the condo. 3 evenings later, I came home with groceries and immediately noticed my favorite framed art print leaning against the wall outside my office. A bright pink sticky note was stuck across the glass. Mine. Anniversary gift. Don't touch. I stared at it for a moment, more puzzled than angry. I'd bought that print in 2017, a full year before Ethan and I met. A week earlier, I probably would have confronted him. Instead, I carried my groceries into the kitchen and quietly pulled down the attic ladder. If he wanted to rewrite history, I'd let the paperwork answer for me. After a few minutes of searching through old storage boxes, I found a black accordion folder labeled Home Purchases. Inside were years of receipts, and halfway through the stack was exactly what I needed. The original gallery certificate and receipt for the artwork, dated June 2017 with my name and credit card information. I smiled to myself. If you're going to invent ownership, I muttered, at least pick something I bought after we met. The next morning, I made 3 copies of the receipt. One went into Victoria's file, another stayed in my office, and the third I taped beside Ethan's sticky note before leaving for work. When I came home that evening, his note was gone. The receipt wasn't. Neither of us mentioned it. We didn't need to. The silence said enough. He knew he'd lost that argument before it had even begun. Over the next week, something quietly changed between us. The arguments gradually disappeared, not because we'd worked anything out, but because we'd stopped pretending there was still a relationship to save. We were simply 2 people living under the same roof, sharing an address but little else. We cooked our own meals, bought our own groceries, and spoke only when something practical needed to be discussed. Ironically, the silence gave me something our arguments never had. Perspective. Without the constant emotional noise, I started noticing details I'd ignored for months. Ethan had always claimed he attended a fitness class every Tuesday and Thursday night. He usually left around 8:30 and didn't return until after 1 in the morning, explaining that everyone stayed afterward talking. I'd never questioned it. Trust had always seemed more important than suspicion. Then, one Thursday evening, I happened to glance out the window as he pulled away. He wasn't wearing gym clothes. Instead, he had on the same navy button-down shirt he'd worn to a friend's birthday dinner a few months earlier. It was a small detail, but it didn't fit. For a moment, I tried to explain it away. Maybe he'd changed plans. Maybe he was meeting someone before class. Then I remembered Victoria's advice. Don't guess, document facts. 2 days later, while separating our household accounts before removing Ethan from the toll pass account, I opened the trip history. A pattern immediately stood out. Nearly every Tuesday and Thursday night, his transponder crossed the same bridge around 9:15 p.m. and returned shortly after 1 in the morning. That didn't make sense. The gym he claimed to attend was only 15 minutes from the condo and didn't require a toll road. Curious, I searched the exit location. Several apartment complexes appeared. One address looked familiar. After a moment, I remembered why. Years earlier, Ethan had casually mentioned that Chloe lived in that neighborhood. I searched her name. Her professional profile placed her only a few blocks from the same exit. I forced myself not to jump to conclusions. Instead, I exported the toll history and compared every trip over the previous several months. The pattern was impossible to ignore. For almost 8 months, Ethan had driven the exact same route every Tuesday and Thursday night. The departure and return times barely changed, even on holidays or the evenings he'd claimed work had kept him late. Those weren't random trips. They were a routine. That realization was impossible to ignore. Random mistakes don't repeat themselves with that level of precision. Habits do. As I continued reviewing the dates, memories I'd dismissed months earlier suddenly took on an entirely different meaning. 3 months before, I'd invited Ethan to have dinner with my parents on a Thursday evening, but he'd declined because, according to him, his fitness group had reserved the studio. The toll records showed he'd crossed the bridge that same night. Another entry reminded me of the Tuesday in February when he'd forgotten our dinner reservation, insisting his trainer had scheduled an extra session at the last minute. Once again, the toll history showed the exact same route, the same bridge, and almost the exact same return time. I closed my eyes. The barbecue hadn't created this problem. It had simply exposed a life Ethan had been quietly living long before he ever suggested inviting Chloe into my home. The more I studied the toll records, the harder it became to believe Ethan's explanation. The barbecue hadn't created a problem between us. It had simply exposed one that had been unfolding long before he invited Chloe into my home. Even then, I wasn't ready to accuse him. Evidence without context can be misleading, and I refused to let suspicion replace facts. But one conclusion was becoming impossible to avoid. Ethan hadn't recently reconnected with Chloe. Whatever relationship they had rebuilt, it had been quietly developing for months. The spreadsheet stayed open on my laptop late into the night as I searched for any explanation that would prove me wrong. I checked the dates again, convinced I must have missed something or accidentally filtered the data incorrectly. Maybe there were duplicate charges. Maybe there was another destination near that exit. Maybe I was connecting dots that didn't belong together. The more I checked, the less room there was for doubt. For nearly 8 months, Ethan had crossed the same bridge almost every Tuesday and Thursday at roughly the same time each evening before returning shortly after 1 in the morning. The schedule was remarkably consistent, surviving holidays, busy work weeks, and every excuse he'd given me along the way. If he'd only reconnected with Chloe a few weeks earlier, as he'd claimed, those trips shouldn't have existed. That was the moment I stopped believing I was looking at isolated incidents. I was looking at a routine. I closed my laptop and stepped onto the balcony, hoping the cool night air would quiet the thoughts racing through my head. Strangely, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had slowly given way to something much heavier. Disappointment. Not because I'd discovered another lie, but because I finally understood how long I'd been trusting someone who had quietly stopped deserving that trust. The following morning, I forwarded the toll records to Victoria. She called less than 20 minutes later. "Please tell me you haven't confronted him yet." "I haven't," I replied. I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining patterns that weren't really there. "You aren't imagining them," she said. "The records clearly establish a consistent pattern." "But they don't prove who he was meeting." "Exactly," she replied. "That's why you shouldn't accuse him of anything you can't actually prove." I smiled despite myself. "You always ruin my dramatic speeches." A soft laugh came through the phone. "My job is to keep you out of unnecessary legal trouble." "So what am I supposed to do?" "For now, nothing." "Nothing?" "Let him keep talking," she said. "People who become comfortable lying rarely know when to stop. Given enough time, they usually create the evidence that exposes themselves." After we hung up, I kept replaying her advice in my head. She was right. Up to that point, Ethan had volunteered nearly every lie on his own. I didn't need to chase the truth or force a confession. All I had to do was stop interrupting the story he was already telling. Thursday evening arrived right on schedule. Around 8:45, Ethan walked through the living room carrying a gym bag over one shoulder. This time he was actually dressed for a workout, almost as if he'd suddenly realized someone might start paying attention. "I'm heading to the gym," he said. I looked up from my book and smiled politely. "Have a good workout." He paused, clearly expecting questions about which class he was taking or when he'd be home. When none came, he hesitated for a second before leaving the condo. 5 minutes after the front door closed, I opened the Toll Pass app. At 9:14 p.m., his transponder crossed the same bridge. I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked my phone without calling or sending a message. There was nothing to gain by confronting him before I understood the full picture. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, watched half a movie, and went to bed. The following morning, another toll appeared. At 1:28 a.m., marking his return trip across the bridge. The consistency unsettled me far more than a single lie ever could. People make mistakes. They don't accidentally follow the exact same route twice a week for 8 months. Over the next several days, I quietly verified every trip until suspicion gave way to something much stronger. Evidence. Even then, one question wouldn't leave me alone. If Ethan had managed to hide this for 8 months, why invite Chloe to our barbecue now? The answer came from someone I never expected. Late Wednesday afternoon, Maya called to check on me. After a few minutes of small talk, she asked, "Did Ethan really tell you to leave your own condo?" "Yes," she sighed. "I talked to Chloe yesterday." That immediately got my attention. She reached out because she couldn't understand why everyone suddenly thought she was involved in someone else's relationship. "What did she say?" Maya hesitated. Apparently, Ethan told her the barbecue was supposed to be a fresh start. He said everyone already knew they'd reconnected and that this was finally a chance for all of you to become friends. I felt my stomach tighten. He actually told her that? She nodded. He wanted everyone to think Chloe was already part of the group. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then everything clicked into place. The barbecue had never been about introducing Chloe to our friends. It was about introducing her into my life. If everyone accepted her that night, then when Ethan eventually left me, she wouldn't look like the woman he'd been hiding. She'd simply look like she'd always belonged. Suddenly, his words from the night of our argument took on a completely different meaning. She's changed. He hadn't been trying to convince me. He'd been rehearsing the story he wanted everyone else to believe. By the time Ethan came home that evening, carrying takeout, I had stopped wondering what was happening. I brought your favorite tie, he said with a hopeful smile. Maybe we can talk. Thanks, I replied. He chatted casually through dinner, acting as though nothing had happened. I let him talk. The more comfortable he felt, the more likely he was to reveal something without realizing it. Eventually, he mentioned, I'll probably be home late tomorrow after the gym. I looked up. The gym? Yeah, Thursday. I nodded. Right. He smiled. Why? No reason. After dinner, while he cleared the table, I carried my laptop into the dining room. Ethan. He turned toward me. Can I ask you something? Sure. I rotated the screen toward him. How's the gym across the river? His face immediately lost color. What are you talking about? The screen showed 8 months of toll records. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, every trip ended at the same location, a red circle around Chloe's apartment complex. He stared at it in silence before finally whispering, And where did you get this? From the toll account that's always been in my name. He kept staring at the screen. I can explain. I shook my head. No, you can tell another story, but you can't explain 8 months of identical trips. His shoulders dropped as he pulled out a chair and sat down. I never wanted you to find out like this. I gave him a tired look. You've had 8 months to tell me. I was trying to figure things out. No, 8 months isn't confusion. It's a second life. He rubbed his face. It wasn't supposed to happen. Then tell me how it happened every Tuesday and Thursday for 8 months. After a long silence, he spoke without looking at me. I ran into Chloe last fall. We got coffee, then we started texting, and eventually, you started sleeping with her. He closed his eyes. Yes. There it was. No dramatic confession. No elaborate excuse. Just one word that confirmed everything. Oddly, I didn't cry. I'd already mourned our relationship somewhere between canceling the barbecue and serving him the notice to vacate. What I felt now wasn't heartbreak. It was relief. Relief that my instincts hadn't been wrong. After a long silence, he looked at me. I never wanted to hurt you. You already did. I made a mistake. I shook my head. A mistake is forgetting my birthday. You made hundreds of choices. You built another relationship, lied to me for months, came home pretending nothing had changed, then invited her into my home. Shame flashed across his face. I know. And you expected me to welcome her. I wasn't trying to replace you. Then what were you doing? He had no answer. I continued quietly. You weren't introducing Chloe to our friends. You were introducing her to my life. You wanted everyone to see her as normal before you finally left me. He stared at the floor. That's not what this was. Then tell me what it was. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time, he'd run out of stories. After that night, we barely spoke. Victoria immediately forwarded the toll records and Ethan's admission to his attorney. The response came within days. The claim for half my condo disappeared. The emotional distress claim vanished. The harassment allegations were quietly withdrawn. Evidence had changed their strategy. Ethan, however, still refused to leave. Every morning, another packed box appeared by the front door. Every evening, it somehow ended up back in the bedroom. It became obvious he wasn't preparing to move. He was postponing the moment he had to admit it was over. 30 days passed faster than I expected. On the final morning, I made coffee, opened every curtain, and watered the plants. The condo already felt lighter. At noon, Ethan's legal right to remain expired. I still gave him another hour, hoping he'd leave with some dignity. By 1 o'clock, he was exactly where I'd left him, sitting on the couch with the television on, surrounded by packed boxes. I walked into the living room and set my coffee mug on the table. It's 1 o'clock. I know. The notice expired an hour ago. I know. I waited. Instead of getting up, he muted the television. I'm not leaving. His voice was calm. Too calm. Like he'd rehearsed those words long before he said them. My lawyer says this eviction isn't valid. He told me you'll have to take me to court, and that could take months. For the first time in weeks, I genuinely felt sorry for him. Not because he was about to lose his home, but because he still believed intimidation worked on someone who had already stopped being afraid. I picked up my phone. His confidence disappeared almost instantly. What are you doing? I'm calling the police. He stared at me. You wouldn't. I told you exactly what would happen if you were still here after the notice expired. He jumped to his feet so quickly the remote slipped from his hand and hit the floor. You're seriously calling the cops on me? I'm requesting a civil standby, I replied. This isn't a criminal matter. It's simply the proper procedure. He let out a nervous laugh. They're going to think you're crazy. We'll find out. I calmly called the non-emergency number and explained that I needed officers present while removing a former at-will occupant who had remained after a properly served notice to vacate had expired. After asking a few routine questions, the dispatcher confirmed that officers were on their way. When I ended the call, Ethan looked at me as though he still couldn't believe I'd actually gone through with it. I can't believe you're doing this. I met his eyes without raising my voice. I couldn't believe you asked me to leave my own home. Neither of us said another word while we waited. About 25 minutes later, someone knocked on the front door. Two uniformed police officers, one man and one woman, were waiting in the hallway. I opened the door before Ethan had the chance to reach it. The female officer offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We received a request for a civil standby." "Yes," I replied. "Please come in." The moment the officer stepped inside, Ethan transformed. His shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with tears, and he hurried toward them before either officer had an opportunity to ask a single question. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," he said, his voice trembling dramatically. "I don't know what's happened, but she's trying to throw me out of my home." "I don't know what's happened," Ethan said, his voice shaking as he hurried toward the officers. "She's throwing me out, filming everything I do, and trying to take everything I own. I don't have anywhere else to go." The female officer turned to me. "Ma'am, could you explain what's happening?" "Of course." I walked into my office and returned with the folder Victoria had helped me prepare. Inside were organized copies of everything that mattered: the condo deed, my identification, the notice to vacate, proof Ethan had received it, receipts, photographs, and the supporting documents arranged in order. I handed a copy to each officer. "I know this sounds emotional," I said calmly, "but everything you need is in that folder." The condo fell silent except for the sound of pages turning. As they read, I watched the female officer's expression change. The sympathy she'd shown Ethan faded into professional neutrality. Ethan noticed it too, and for the first time, he looked genuinely worried. The male officer closed the folder first. "Mr. Brooks, based on these documents, Miss Carter is the sole owner of this condominium. The notice was properly served, the required period has expired, and the legal process appears to have been followed." Ethan frowned. "That's not what my lawyer told me." "I'm not here to evaluate your attorney's advice," the officer replied. "I'm here to determine whether the homeowner followed the proper procedure. Based on the documentation, she did." Desperate for another argument, Ethan pointed toward my office. "She's keeping my property." The female officer looked at me. "What property is being disputed?" I already knew. I returned with the framed art print and the original gallery receipt. "This receipt is dated June 2017, the officer said after reading it. Then she looked at Ethan. "When did your relationship begin?" 2018. "So this artwork was purchased before you met." He looked down. The officer handed the receipt back to me. "Based on this documentation, we can't consider it your property." That was the moment Ethan stopped arguing. Every claim he'd made had collapsed the same way. Not because I argued harder, but because the evidence spoke for itself. The female officer nodded toward the packed boxes. "If you believe you have any remaining civil claim, you're free to pursue it in court. Today, however, you need to collect your undisputed belongings and leave." Ethan looked at me, and for the first time, I saw real regret. About 20 minutes later, Claire pulled into the parking lot. Without a word, she helped him carry his boxes downstairs. With every trip, the condo grew a little emptier as books, camping gear, holiday decorations, and the ordinary pieces of the life we'd built together disappeared one box at a time. On the final trip, she stopped in front of me. "I owe you an apology." I waited. "He told me you were jealous. He said Chloe had only recently contacted him, and I believed him." She looked down before continuing. "When I found out about the 8 months, I realized he'd lied to all of us. You weren't the only one." She nodded. "I defended him. I even threatened you." "I know. I'm sorry." Looking at her, I realized something Ethan never understood. She wasn't asking to escape the consequences of her choices. She was accepting them. "Thank you." She gave a small nod and walked away. It was the last time we ever spoke. A few minutes later, Ethan was the only person left inside the condo. Standing by the front door with a backpack over one shoulder, he looked around the nearly empty living room. "I never thought it would end like this." "Neither did I." He met my eyes. "I loved you. I believe you." He gave a sad smile. "But I also loved having options." He lowered his head. "I wish I could take it back." "I know. If I had another chance, I'd choose differently." I smiled sadly. "The hardest thing about choices is that they matter before we make them, not after." He nodded. "I hope someday you'll forgive me." "Maybe I will," I said. "But forgiveness isn't the same as giving someone another chance." He understood. Without another word, he walked out. The officers followed him into the hallway. Claire closed the elevator doors, and the condo finally fell silent. I locked the door, slid the security latch into place, and rested my forehead against the wood for a few seconds. I wasn't crying. I was finally letting go. When I turned around, the condo felt strangely spacious. I waited for the familiar sounds, the television, footsteps, another argument. But nothing came. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt peaceful. Life didn't magically become easier. The legal bills kept arriving, and by the time everything ended, I'd spent thousands of dollars protecting a home that had always been mine. It was exhausting, unfair, and expensive. But it bought me peace. A week later, Victoria called. "Ethan's attorney has withdrawn the remaining claims." What changed? They reviewed the toll records, the camera footage, and the timeline. Once they realized the evidence contradicted every major allegation, there wasn't much left to fight over. So that's it? As far as the legal case goes, yes. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Closure. That afternoon, Maya invited me out for coffee. We spent hours talking about everything except lawyers until she finally leaned across the table with a grin. Want the latest gossip? I laughed. I probably shouldn't. But you do. I definitely do. She smiled. Ethan moved in with Chloe. I figured. But here's the funny part. I raised an eyebrow. She rents a tiny one-bedroom apartment with 2 roommates. I couldn't help laughing. You're kidding. I wish I were. It turned out the fantasy Ethan had chased looked very different in real life. Without my income covering most of the bills, reality caught up quickly. Rent, groceries, utilities, and everyday responsibilities replaced the excitement that had fueled their affair. Some relationships survive in secrecy. Very few survive ordinary life. Affairs often survive because they're built around stolen moments. Real life demands much more than that. And Claire? I asked. Maya's smile faded. She eventually learned everything. The affair, the lies, and how Ethan manipulated her into defending him. She isn't speaking to either of them anymore. I didn't feel happy hearing that. Mostly I felt relieved. The truth had finally reached everyone it needed to reach. It simply took longer for some people than others. 2 weeks later, I did something I'd been postponing since the breakup consumed every corner of my life. I rescheduled the barbecue. Before sending out new invitations, I hired a cleaning company to deep clean the condo from top to bottom. Every cabinet, every carpet, every window was cleaned. And after changing the locks one final time, I walked into the backyard where this entire story had begun. The grill was warming up as friends gathered in the backyard, laughing and settling into their seats. Watching them, I realized something I hadn't felt in months. The house finally felt like home again. Before everyone arrived, I opened my laptop, pulled up the original guest list, and sent one last email. Subject: the barbecue is back on. Hi everyone. Thank you for your patience. The house is peaceful again, and I'd love to finally host the barbecue we should have had from the beginning. Same place, 2 weeks from Saturday. My home, my rules. I hope to see you all there. Replies began arriving almost immediately. Wouldn't miss it. Count us in. Save me a burger. I smiled and closed my laptop. 4 years of my life had unraveled because of one sentence. If you're uncomfortable, you can leave. In the end, he was the one who left. As I looked around at the people who had chosen to stay, not because they needed anything from me, but because they genuinely cared, I realized I hadn't lost the life I'd spent years building. I'd simply removed the one person who had stopped appreciating the privilege of being part of it.